The first secretary of the senior vice president told the second secretary of the undersecretary to regional divisional department heads that the principal administrative assistant to the chief executive officer from international headquarters has issued a memo to all marketing managers that operational directors and their junior support staffs were to be deep six by mid-fiscal because the parameters, structures, variables, inputs, outputs, correlation, and inventories of the bean counters didn't maximize and optimize, but bells and whistles in the dog and pony show for the dummy corporation of the puppet government.
All right, welcome very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Dr. Francesco Patricolo, and he's a performance artist, and he's got a great new CD out called Bopaganda, and he happens to be an old dear friend of mine in Francesco. Welcome very much to Conversations, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and back to Manhattan, if I may say so.
Yes, I'm very, very happy to be here.
You just had a little cut off your new CD there and everything. We want to talk about it. But I think it would be interesting, Frank, if we could, if you don't mind, Francesco.
Not at all.
Maybe you could, because we like to do, we got a lot of time and everything. Maybe you could share a little of your own background for the people here in Manhattan. Share your own background, and then we're going to talk about, you know, the contemporary human condition and the culture and that sort of thing. But
I'd like to.
What's your story, Morning Glory?
I was born right here in Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually was born in Flower Fifth Dahlia Hospital, which is no longer around. And I was actually born in the same the room right next to Rob Reiner.
Oh, really?
Same day, in February 28th, 1947. And the doctor that delivered me was a man named Dr. Robert Shapiro. And he just recently passed away. And I think he delivered both of us. My father had a photograph of Carl Reiner and him with cigars with the boys and the thing. It was funny. And I sometimes see Rob Reiner on there, and I know he doesn't, you know, of course.
Remember,
but the funny thing about it was, about a year ago, a great Swami Aseshananda, who was 93 years old.
Satchidananda.
Aseshananda.
Oh, a different one,
who was passing away. And I was invited to see him in his last days, and I found out that that this doctor that delivered me, Shapiro, was actually a disciple of Aseshananda's.
Isn't it a small
and they
universe?
were right across the street, and it was such a small world. The day that I went to see Aseshananda, he had he had passed away in Arizona. And I was like, wow. You know, it's like, oh, this, you know, the Jungian synchronicity thing. You know, it's like, so life gets perfect if you just see these little miracles and lessons. And I was born right here, and I was raised in East Harlem. At that time, it was predominantly an Italian community. And in fact, there's a lot of cultural things that I really like to see resurrected from that time. It was East Harlem in those days, in the 50s and early 60s, was not the great American melting pot. It wasn't even a mosaic. You know, it wasn't one of those multicultural things.
So what was it?
It was one big
family
vaudeville show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
It was a time and a place when comedy was jazz.
Okay.
When people had an attitude regarding comedy that just was instilled.
Everybody had a rap job.
Everybody had a rap for every sap. And a spiel for every heel, and it was just like bang, 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 bang. It's a whole variety of comedy. And the thing that turned me on to jazz rapping, or jazz raconteur, which is just storytelling in a jazz tonal cluster format with words, was growing up in the streets at that time. Because there was the language of the streets at that time was very melodic and harmonic, and had very experimental rhythms to it. And we would have annually, which I'm not sure happens anymore, but it was part of a cultural phenomena at the time, where we used to sound and insult people. It was called the Dozens or something like that. And every year around July, the 20 top or the 15 people that wanted to just do it would sound down and insult each other for hours. and I was just amazed until it finally boiled down to two persons. And everybody cleared it, took a little space, and then went right into it, and the gloves on it. And people were just like for hours until finally one person couldn't respond.
Stand it anymore.
And the whole crowd would go, whoa! and it comes like a fist fight.
Right.
Verbal karate, and the person that really won those sound downs.
Yes, sound downs.
Were considered the gods of jokesters.
Right.
Jokesterisms.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And they ruled like heavyweight champions.
I'll be down. Really.
And they were just like, and I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, and I used to attend these things. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people would attend these the plazas.
Really?
But one particular plaza that I can remember that we used to do it on between 3rd and Lexington.
Yeah.
And it involved Hispanics, Latinos, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, blacks, Italians, Jews, and it was like one of those events where the communities didn't have a lot of tension, but there was a lot of vested interest in like who was going to
do the sound rap.
The sound rap, right? It was like, and I would sit there and record.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just amazed.
Well, you're still doing that. You're still taking all those notebooks. How many of those you got now?
471.
471 notebooks with thoughts and everything like that written down in it. It's amazing. Archive of the cultural history of the country.
Since the 60s.
It was an interesting place then, right? To be drug
It was. And then it got pretty ugly, though, again. You know. But it was a time when you had great speakers, Adam Clayton Powell.
Yeah.
I came in at the end of the Vito Marcantonio.
Oh, yeah.
Vito Marcantonio used to have these, I mean, it was pre-television, and yet it wasn't, because East Harlem was still primitive in the 50s, and so people would have barn fires, and politicians would stand up, and you'd have Adam Clayton Powell. And
you mean with actual fires?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Like, and I went to school at Rice High School. There was only 2 high schools in Harlem. Almost all the white kids went to Rice, and all the other kids, blacks and whatever, went to Benjamin Franklin. And we used to pass on 116th Street, going from one side to the other, and during the day it was neutral zone.
Yes, right.
Until when the sun went down. Then, if you were in the wrong neighborhood, it was just
you were in deep trouble.
Trouble. Yeah. But during school hours, for the most part, it was great. So I used to mingle and hear Malcolm X when I used to come out of school.
Really? Yeah.
And we had attended the Baptist church up there, and I'd heard Adam Clayton Powell. Yeah. A lot of the speakers. Yeah. Which were really talking to the people, and were just dynamic speakers. Vito Marcantonio was, I mean...
He was good, right?
He was like...
Bigger than life, right?
He was bigger than life. Yeah. And there's another person that very little actually has been said about him or written about him, and actually is unjustified. The man really was a people's worker. And what he was the only person voted to not go into the Korean War.
Oh, really? Yeah, he's the only one, right? Somebody had to do it,
and
right?
He could, after a while, the Democrats threw him out, and he was working with the communists, and anybody would help him. Yeah. And they still couldn't beat him. They even redistricted the zone to include Yorkville, and that was finally they defeated him under those circumstances. But it was an exciting time, and it kind of broke about 1965, 1966,
really?
66. Yeah. And then it just went into like a slum. And
so you had your politicals with what you might call a really good, what do you call it, sound rap kind of thing. They had a kind of cadence and a humor to cadence.
Yeah, cadence.
It was entertaining in a real sense of the word.
But it was very, very, there was more to it than that. Yeah. Because it was like a demonstration of ability to spontaneously cause the disarmament of an opponent through the use of words.
Yes. Right.
And humor.
Yeah, and humor. That's
and the point is, you couldn't just disarm or insult or crush somebody. You had to do it in a way that people laughed, not only at the person, but at the circumstances around it, because it wasn't good enough just to laugh at the person.
Right, because that could be a cheap shot.
That was a cheap shot. You had to really make it so that anybody...
So this was a phenomenon sociological.
Gone. Yeah. But this was something that was like fungus, or grew up spontaneously out of the soil of the environment of East Harlem. You had, generations of Italians, Irish, Puerto Ricans have been in El Barrio from in the 30s. Yeah. And we always felt second to the West Side, which got a big reputation, the Black Harlem, with the Cotton Club and the music and the Renaissance and stuff. But there was a lot of good cultural things that were occurring, and to some glimmers still occurring in East Harlem. But I'm disappointed that area of the city has been left virtually bombed out for 40, 50 years.
Yeah. Well,
and I don't see why that you know, there was so many beautiful houses there.
Now those sound downs you're talking about,
Yeah.
you're talking about performing art and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's because the spoken word is becoming
you know
a huge phenomenon now. But what did those things, those raps, were they spontaneous?
Yes.
Or did they begin to take a form? There was signifying monkey. There were some that were real forms that took on a almost score or script.
Yeah, that's where the jazz rapping came in. That's what I'm resurrecting. I've been resurrecting for years and saving the stories and preserving the stories that actually came out of that.
Yeah.
But no, it was a spontaneous thing. It was also a unifying. It was a tension reliever.
Yeah.
It was a way to actually stop warfare.
Yeah.
People. In fact, at the end, it was called
Warfare
the
in the Streets.
Warfare in the Streets. Right. At the end of it, I think the last great sound down in East Harlem. And this was really fun. It was about 1961, 62. And at the end, we started calling them the Warrior. The Warriors. The Warrior Poets.
Just Warrior Poets.
The Warrior Poets.
Right, yeah.
And people really, really took that serious. I mean, people trained, memorized, and that they would keep guarded any insults or any jokes or any stories until to that sound down.
And this was where some of the real humor was.
Yes,
I mean,
it was jazz.
Now, you had things and it was tied into the jazz scene.
Because remember, early jazz was like played by outlaws.
Yeah,
you know, it was an outlaw music.
A lot of creativity is done
and this
by
was outlaw comedy. This was like
outlaw comedy.
This was outlaw comedy.
Right.
And it was, you know, it's not punchlines. You know, it's
comedy. Did you get into
punchlines?
Did you get into stuff like what's his name, like Mel? No, I mean like Lenny Bruce and that kind of thing.
No,
or is that a different?
No.
That's a different thing,
no, it was
right?
a different thing. Yeah.
But it was from that time era.
Yes.
And how'd you relate to the pros like that, or
they were just people making money, and even though they were good, but they weren't part of the.
So this was strictly a street thing. It wasn't a club scene. There wasn't a club scene for that thing. It wasn't social clubs or anything. But people got big reputations based on what they could say in a funny kind of way.
And people would be almost like bodyguards. Gangsters, no matter what the color, would always have one of these warrior poets with them in case they needed verbal insults.
Like a court jester.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the court jester, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Those people made money.
That was like a consigliere or something like that. Yeah,
it would just you could not, you go into a situation, you don't want to shoot a guy.
Yeah, right. You want to just be able
to break his legs with humor.
Yeah, right. That's good. That's not a bad formula, is it, for the human condition?
And it worked.
But didn't some of these things take on a sort of life of their own? Some of them became certain kinds of jazz pieces take on a life of their own.
A number
like Signifying Monkey, right? That became like a classic.
The things that I have resurrected and preserved, I have made a lifetime out of preserving.
Yeah.
A great. Now, this phenomena that occurred in East Harlem after the Second World War, actually, was something that had roots in other cultures, in Hispanic culture in South America, in Africa, in Eastern Europe. It was similar. It was a very primitive peasant community tribal activity. Again, come the projects, when the projects started coming and knocking down houses and started building these buildings, and a lot of other transformations happened, movement into the suburbs and television.
Which you did.
And exactly, and television. A lot of that just got...
Television is a big transformer, right?
But I still like to preserve part of what I do in propaganda, which is a blatant attempt to influence a person's beliefs through the use of comedy, poetry, and jazz, has its roots in my experiences in the streets of East Harlem as a youngster.
And the propaganda is? The word itself comes from...
It's a cross between bebop, which is a musical
form
term,
of jazz,
and propaganda, which is a political term, and it's a verbal fusion of those terms. Propaganda.
Propaganda. That's what you call the record, right? Yeah. And you've got One Thin Dime on there as one of them.
Yeah,
right?
One Thin Dime. And I've got. This is the first of 3 albums.
Yeah.
And the second one, I have other pieces on it, and the third one, I'm doing a number of other people, and 2 of my own bits. One bit is the Hip Jung.
Yeah, Hip Jung, like
Carl Jung Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and Adler have a swinging trio in Danube Delta region of Vienna at the turn of the century, and they're beatnik jazz players, right? In the Biorhythm Kings,
yeah,
you know.
Right. Biorhythm, yeah.
And they play very hip songs.
So was this thing, this street fisticuffs, voice-to-cuffs, words-to-cuffs, you know,
right.
was this in the tradition of Lord Buckley?
No.
Or was Lord Buckley still too highfalutin?
No.
Separate for us,
See,
this
again,
street thing. And who was the all-time great rapster that came out of that area, in that comic vein of the East Harlem? Was there an undisputed champion, and who was he?
You know what, I'll tell you? I'll give you a shot.
Yeah,
right?
let me know.
There was a number of them, and almost all of them had the same name. They all called everybody, no matter what. The head rapper was always called Charlie.
Charlie.
There was Charlie Baggs, there was Charlie Black, Charlie the Chump, Charlie the Chimp. There was Garbage Charlie. There was Big Charlie the Horse.
No,
yeah,
really? Sounds like Damon Runyon.
Big Charlie the Horse would punch you in the leg when you weren't looking. This guy was so big, he looked like a refrigerator with a Volkswagen Bug on top of him, right? And he was really popular. In prison.
In prison.
Really. He once put a thumbtack on the electric chair and Sing Sing. Oh, he was out there. But there was Charlie the Devil. Charlie the Devil was for like the late 50s. Charlie the Devil was outrageous. And Charlie the Devil actually got
These are real people you're talking about. These are people that lived up there would know who you're talking about.
Absolutely.
These were
Charlie
the real...
Charlie the Devil got an education. After 44 years, he finally made it through matriculation.
Yes, right.
The State Educational Correctional Facility, mental health facility.
Yes, right.
Where's that? Wingdale up there, right? Yeah. But he got himself a master's degree in leisure arts.
Leisure arts. That's a coming field, I think. It should be.
He was specializing in the abuse of the semicolon in Elizabethan drama.
Yeah, right.
And he wrote a book called The Leisure of the Theory Class.
Yes, right. The Leisure of the Theory.
Oh, he's well known.
Yeah,
he's an advocate for total
Now, Frank,
unemployment.
you're not just putting me down with these names. These are real, honest-to-God, cultural history people out of the real world.
He's an advocate for total
unemployment. The people up there might remember some of them.
Yeah,
right.
I'm afraid to expose all this stuff.
So what's the difference between these gues and Buckley?
Well,
Lord Buckley himself,
Buckley,
the Lord, the Naz, the hip Naz.
The Lord was nothing happened in a vacuum. Lord Buckley just did not appear out of nowhere.
Well, I know
there was a precedent of artists that were working in that genre from the turn of the century that he moved on and yet crystallized. What he did was take very rich and complex approaches to jazz, to storytelling by clustering the words in a jazz genre and a format, and clustering the tones, and then telling these stories in such a way. And he was really the first one, in my opinion, and actually my experience about this, that actually started bringing spiritualism into the bars. I mean, his idea of saying, hey, this is my church. We're all lords and ladies. We're all gods.
Lords and ladies.
And he actually
the court,
took the situation out of like the nightclub, soul girls, and actually started saying, we're holy people. And I'm going to tell you some jazz stories. Now, that's not unlike Coltrane. It's not unlike Sun Ra and others who actually had a spiritual approach to their music. He had a spiritual approach to the telling of jazz stories.
You think Buckley was sort of, in a sense, one of a kind, or in a class by himself, or in a
He was a class by himself.
Yeah, he was something. They got this festival that's going on.
We do, and I'm going to be there on April 12th next year. I'll be at the West Beth at this project. And he was a class by himself and undiscovered. But
there's a disconnect between Buckley and that kind of thing and the streets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what's the source of the disconnect?
I try to tell you because this was a tribal thing. This wasn't this was survival.
Yeah, survivalville.
Just how to live. It was a training session. On how to survive in the streets. And it had grown into a way of actually relieving a lot of tension and unity. In fact, Emmett Grogan wrote a book called Ring Alivio.
Yeah, Ring Alivio is a great
one of the other things that happened also in East Harlem, and he writes about this, is one of the other projects. You see, the volunteerism, there was a lot of local people who were good people who actually didn't want the young people to war and fight each other because they were racially different and economic.
Sure, all that nonsense.
So you had projects paid for by gangsters and other street people.
To keep the peace through humor.
Right, and they would do big mammoth Ringolevio games where all of Manhattan was part of the project, and you'd have hundreds of youngsters who had practiced. Well, these were things that grew out of the streets and the people's interactions.
Yeah.
They weren't meant for entertainment so much as they were meant for demonstration of skills for survival reasons. Ringolevio was like a war game.
Okay, like that.
Brought into a soft context.
So was this a New York City thing, or were there echoes or
I don't remember any place else
of it elsewhere in the country or something? As with jazz, jazz was not only New York. A lot of it was in New York and that sort of thing, but it wasn't only New York.
We had dozens, people doing the dozens in most any ghetto situation. But it wasn't on that level that it was there in Harlem, because I'm talking about. I remember one in 1959 where there were thousands of people. Alatunji was playing at in the plaza for hours because. And people. I remember the one standoff between two guys that must have gone on for 8 hours.
Really? Really?
I mean it.
God, it should have been videotaped or filmed or something.
But it's
was
gone.
Any of that stuff filmed or taped or recorded?
I have.
You got any recordings?
No recordings of it. But we have photographs of the mobs.
Yes, right.
And photographs of the champions.
Yeah.
Several of the champions of the late 50s, early 60s. Yeah.
Joke-offs.
There were big, major joke-offs.
Yeah.
But not really. I mean, it was it was karate.
Yeah, right.
It was verbal karate. I think that part of what I cherished about this, I wrote a screenplay on this called The Warrior Poets of Harlem, and it's part of what I'm. What I'm doing now. I'm actually moving it. And the screenplay has in it the actual movement and how it all moved about as karate, verbal protection. Okay, because there were people who couldn't run fast or but they were clever.
Yeah. Well, they had to be clever if they couldn't run fast.
Just be clever, and then people actually got scared.
Like the signified monkey?
No, you couldn't. They would just cut you up in 2 seconds. And what are you looking They make Don Rickles look like a little turkey.
Don Rickles is a pretty fast mind.
But I mean, I would have loved to taken pros in that game and throw them in that.
You don't think Don Rickles could have
defended
those guys off?
Easy. It was like a tough man contest.
How about Johnny McKenna?
Maybe
he might. Yeah, but that was a different kind of. It's interesting. So the ever-loving, ever-running story of Francesco.
Anyway, I bring that up because I wrote about it as a screenplay. It's things I'm doing with it. But and also it's close to my heart because it's gone.
Yeah.
Part of propaganda. What I'm doing is propaganda is
trying to bring that back.
Right.
And you also want to see the links between that and jazz.
Yes.
And what about that and the beats? And the beats were to be the precursors to the hippie and all of that.
It was a whole different thing.
What was the time
the beats were a little bit more educated downtown, dropouts in a different scene. The beat game, which I really enjoyed, was not, just... the beats were just like nowhere.
These guys weren't anywhere, but they came to influence the thing, and there was a tie into that. You had Buckley, and then you had some other kinds of... Then you didn't see a connection between that and Bruce. And so forth.
Absolutely, but
it grew into that, right?
I'm telling you,
and then that's influenced modern humor. And that's very important. But I'm just trying to get cultural roots here.
Yeah.
Because so much of the stuff comes from environments like that. Yeah. And then you have white cover groups or something.
But the thing I'm trying to say is that game has been wiped out. Yeah. That's gone. That grassroots warrior poet phenomena, which you couldn't promote, it was not something like somebody sat around and promoted it and videotaped it and used it as entertainment. This was cockfighting with words and humor. Yeah, it was humor wars,
But it was a line in akin to jazz. Right?
Yes,
and jazz. And jazz came out of those circles. Jazz came out of a lot of those kind of back places, and all kinds of
and a lot of the clubs.
Places, now jazz is played at the Lincoln Center to the tuxedos and so forth. But you don't have Lord Buckley at the Lord. Do you think we'll ever get Lord Buckley or Charlies of Harlem into Lincoln Center?
Yes,
it'll go that far.
You know why I think they will? Because it's a neglected indigenous art form.
Like jazz was.
Now
jazz is being recognized and everybody's jumping out and trying to claim it as their own.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Established people, right? Yeah. Okay.
But you see, this art form actually has its links in the roots of the religious people of the South at the turn of the century. You
Gospel?
see, oh yeah, you see the mixture of the jazz thing was not just the music, or it's New Orleans, marching bands, classical music, Cajun, blues, jazz, all these things kind of mixing together, you know.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was also happening at the same time was a phenomena of seances.
That's right.
People who would go and sit around a table and actually communicate to the dead, and this is where the word rap came from, rapolo. But it was like they would rap on the table and if they and have communications with the dead people. A lot of the jazz musicians in the black community were really, really evangelical, and in that framework were rappers, and people
were they known as rappers?
Yes,
no,
the religious
we call them rappers now. We have rappers now.
Different.
Is there a tie between Charlie's of there? What you were talking about in the rap thing going on now?
Let me tell you. Show you the connection.
Talk to me.
The musical flow. If you look at a river, and there's a lot. There was a spiritual religious phenomena occurring at that time, particularly in the Midwest and South, but not exclusively. It was also in the Northeast, where people were actually getting together to experiment with the communication with soul and the spirits of deceased relatives and people. And they would call upon them with a kind of collective intuition or whatever. And in order for those people to know that the being was there, they required some rapping on a table.
Okay.
And yes mean yes, you know. Well, the traditional main line. Listen to me, I'll tell you.
Sorry.
The traditional mainline religions consider these people freaks and derogatorily call them rappers. Okay, because they're rapping on the tables.
Right.
Now, a lot of the black musicians at the time, Fats Waller, Louis Armstrong, others, were also rappers in that they had senses connections with those groups who were trying to do that. And there was a gentleman named Leon Rapolo, who was a New Orleans Italian guy, who was playing with the New Orleans Philharmonic or Orchestra, straight classical
You're not
orchestra.
just bringing this in because your name's Patricolo.
No, because I'm showing the multiple roots. Okay. But he happened to be one of the... So he showed up down on Bourbon Street, and he was clarinet and classically trained, and was so impressed, as other European people who had come there for what the music was doing, that he was really sitting in more and more with them rather than going to play at the classical orchestra symphony, and eventually got into the point of jamming, and he got lost in these states of consciousness and actually started...
Well, jazz can carry you away, or music can carry you away.
So like Fats Waller and those guys, and Joe Oliver started calling his bit of stream consciousness the rap act. It's rapping. It's the soul coming through him, spirit coming through him. And he formed a group called the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, which influenced Mez Mesro and Benny Goodman, his clarinet player, and brought the jazz up to Chicago as part of the white wave of New Orleans people that had brought...
Kansas City.
He brought it up to Chicago and Kansas City. And he died... fell off a boat in Lake Michigan trying to hug the moon. Of course, Mesro and people said he was stoned on pot or something. But he died like the Chinese philosopher, what's it, Lao Tzu, or the poet that also died that way. He told the hug of the moon. Went over the garage, boom, dead. But he died young. It made a major impact. But his style, the rap's rap, continued there, and you had Vachel Lindsay, who came. Vachel Lindsay came and was influenced by the situation. Did the Congo, which is one of the first academic poems that was bringing poetry into that. And then in the 20s, and then you started seeing more of with the flappers and the big band thing, and more of the scat singing, and the more and more you started seeing, until finally in the 30s. You started seeing, and particularly in the 50s. Now, this whole jazz rapping thing got really crystallized in the 50s, right after the Second World War.
Really?
During the Second World War, you had lots of things like the Stories of the Signifying Monkey and other things of that nature that were crystallized by the black troops that were in the war. lots of time they did that as morale builders. So they started bringing up the stories that they had learned from which out of religious circumstances and transferring them into musical things. And then they didn't have instruments at Monte Cassino, so they were playing pans and stuff and rapping the stories to pans and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I know this because all that information came to me from those people when I was growing up.
Well, yeah, from those people that were in East Harlem.
And
yeah.
East
There were other forces coming from other parts of the country and so forth, all coming around. Jazz came from a lot of different places.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the jazz rap stuff.
All right,
That's jazz storytelling.
Yeah.
When I first heard those stories that were told by the musicians, that used to, people from the Cotton Club at that time that were happening, and a lot of other places used to come.
Callaway?
No, no others. I don't. I mean,
okay.
They used to come to these warrior poet standoff, joke-off things, and you'd have an enormous number of a variety of different people who would come just to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And then in intermissions in certain places at times, they'd get up and tell the stories, and as part of what was going on.
Well, a lot of that didn't that come out of life. I mean, life itself had a great deal of humor and that sort of thing, and spirit, soul, and so
in a
forth.
therapeutic, I think the people there were kind of desperate in a way, and humor was a way of a kind of keeping a perspective on it. So because people were just, it was dirt pool no matter how it went down. The people were just, and there was a lot of racial tensions and economic tensions, and the time was just strange.
Yeah.
And it was and the humor that the people had natively protected them, gave them a sense of perspective.
And there was a tie-in through the poetics with the jazz
Yes.
genre and that kind of thing like that, and it's going. And now, listen, we keep going because you're coming up, you're bringing it up historically and all of that. But this kind of thing, this humor, we live with a great deal of free-floating angst in our society now and so forth. Humor's coming, and the written word or the spoken word is becoming a major, and performance art is really surfacing in a way that surprises a lot of people. Poetry's doing pretty well now.
Yep, it is.
Remember Ray Bremser used to say it was, the Beatniks, they had their best year about 1959 or something like that.
He was named by Downbeat the quintessential jazz poet.
Who?
Ray Bremser.
Ray was? Yeah. Really? By Downbeat?
Downbeat magazine.
Oh, God bless him.
1959.
Blues for Blondie was great,
He did a beautiful piece that I do.
But they transmogrified into the hippie thing and everything, I think, don't you?
Yeah, but he did a beautiful piece that I do now.
Really?
It's called Monk and Moonshot, which he did with Thelonious Monk, and it's a story about when the Russians sent the first dog into space, and Monk used to have a dog that he should take with him all the time, but he was like really concerned, and Bremser said, "Well, why are you so concerned?" He said, "Because I hope they leave the window open for the dog so he can get some air up there." But he was serious.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. You were worrying about the dog.
So they did this bit that was very funny.
He's a funny guy. Yeah.
And I'm surprised. I go and perform, and the people that want to go see the shows are young, 19, 20, 21.
Kids are picking up on this. Yeah.
They want to hear Monk. They want anything. They'll hear poetry, and it's a nice link because when they hear like Ray's poetry that has all these rhythms in it, like Monk music, they make quick connections and better understanding to the music by hearing the poetry.
Yeah, right.
So you see,
that's good.
by bringing out
that's a good lead-in. That's a good lead-in.
Good way to teach and educate the aesthetic, which is part of what
good opening act.
What I did was becoming a doctor of psychology. Been working with individuals and families. It's a whole other
you
story.
went to the suburbs.
Well,
for a while.
That's another story.
Right.
But the point I'm bringing out here is that at one point, in my preservation of these stories, I put together a show basically educating people of this indigenous American art form.
Which is an art form.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Turn of the century, and I've isolated certain people from certain decades, and I would perform their work as it is, plus do some of my own stuff.
Yeah.
Now, at one point, I realized doing therapy with individuals and families, that which I decided to take all that I learned out of the consulting room and put it back into the culture.
Yeah, try to do something on a large scale.
Yeah, and because I think working with the culture and helping to transform very core values to break up some cultural hegemony.
Yeah.
You know,
could help a lot more individuals.
Help a lot more than one. Yeah. And so I've worked into the point being a writer and a performance artist. I love it. I like hanging out with musicians better than lawyers.
Musicians are great.
Better than
lawyers.
Better than lawyers, attorneys, and computer programmers. And even though even though they're the most bizarre people sometimes.
The musicians.
Because you know,
but
when it comes down to trust,
but they've got
and it comes down to whipping it out in a loving way.
Yeah.
Can't beat them.
Yeah.
You know, and it's an alliance situation.
Well, some of the poet, there's a link between poets and the musicians.
But musicians are kind of always like
right.
But when everybody's on time and everybody whips it out.
Yeah.
And they make love for about an hour, and presenting an effect that everybody agrees on.
And you can always know if it's good. If it's really good,
they're into it.
And if it isn't, they're going to need money.
That's right. That's how I'm with it.
Right.
If they love it, they'll do it. And if they don't love it,
the love of it.
But if they don't love it, you got to pay them.
Yeah, right.
So far, I've been doing it for love.
Yeah, right.
And all the people that have been working with me on this project of preserving these stories have been doing it because they want to.
So what are the venues for this sort of thing, and where do we find it? Are there records? Are there CDs? Who are some of the people? There's Lord Buckley.
Well,
I mean, in a sense, but you know, from this hard, you know what I'm trying to say is like in jazz, there's always this music being made somewhere, and then there's all these Pat Boone people, you know. And I mean, who are the people that are the real ones, and where can we get at it?
You know, Mikhail Horowitz.
Yeah,
there's
Mikhail's genius. Yeah, the Fugs.
They're not performing so much now.
No, but I mean, but I'm saying they're part of it.
Yes, in a way.
Ed Sanders,
Tuli Kupferberg, those people. I think a lot of the people that are doing it now, I don't know. I've heard their work. I don't know them personally, but there are like in this town, there's maybe 10 or 12 clubs that are actually flourishing, doing spoken word. Chicago has
That's a lot.
Yes,
compared to what it was. Yeah,
more so than comedy clubs.
Yeah, okay.
Because
now,
the baby boom,
what's the difference between the comedy club and the spoken word?
But comedy club, comedy was ripped off at one point and became punchline. It became product.
Right.
This
scripted,
right? What we're talking about here is actually a viewpoint and a person's life. It's a process of life. A person lives this. This is not something you get up and do. Bang, 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 bang.
It's not scripted.
It's not scripted.
Yeah.
You have to have the viewpoint.
Yeah.
Period.
Right,
if you don't have the viewpoint.
Yeah. You fast on your feet. You're fast on your cerebrum.
The other thing is that at one point the comedy clubs became mass producing a certain. They died because of it. You get up there and you know.
But it sounds like comedy. The rap. We make the distinction. Well, you know, the
spoken
spoken word.
It's not. No,
okay,
it's
come
not,
on. I'm sorry.
Comedy, because you're mixing. Here's a philosophical. You're taking like an alchemist.
Yeah.
Components of linguistics, components of music, components of philosophy and poetry, and you're putting it together in a stew that comes out with a completely different psychopoetic. And that's what happens is the baby boomers, us.
Yeah. Well,
us
speak for yourself,
are not going to be interested watching Saturday Night Live. I was like, I don't watch these programs. Sometimes I happen to wake up and I'll see something out of it. They are not funny.
Well, some of them are.
Bits and pieces, but generally it's just a product and it's a thing. But what happens is more people want to hear philosophical, poetic insights.
Humorously put
in a way that they can enjoy.
Yeah.
That's it. And they're not interested anymore of it's like sugar or donuts or after a while people don't want to eat that food. They want to eat more nutritional food. They don't want to eat mass manufactured food. They want to hear something from the heart, something that speaks to them. And there's no way to really say, because poetry has taken a format that it's like a being that is evolving on its own to fit the circumstances of the people.
Do you think poetry's still growing out of alienation, or did it grow out of alienation, or where does poetry come from? Where does poetry come from?
Love. I think it's a vibrational connection. So it's like, oh, I'm in love. I just one with the universe. A sense of integration with with higher to lower or lower to higher, being one with the universe, loving the smell of a flower or loving or something, and being able to reflect on. I think the motivation is love. I don't think it's alienation. I think
you don't think
might
it comes
happen,
out of alienation. You don't think
no.
if somebody's really in an alienating situation, bring a poem out of it.
Get a poem out of
it. You know.
I think there's a point where poets like criminals or other people on the edge, do not march to the mainstream stuff.
That can be a hard thing to do,
and that's very hard. But I think there's a difference. Like Salvador Dali was asked if he was a psychotic. Or if he took drugs, he says there's the only difference between me and a psychotic is that I'm not a psychotic. So the interviewer said, I don't get it. He says, well, both the psychotic and an artist go to the depths of their subconscious.
Interesting.
Into their world, deep into their world. However, the artist comes back to the lifesaver of reality to share what they've brought up. The psychotic doesn't come up for air. The idea here about saying the difference between alienation is that the poet, has to remove themselves from the mad sounding, because the mad march, in order to listen and hear the inner and outer simultaneously, and to bring back their gifts to the people who are just too busy to stop and appreciate the sunset.
Do you think there's a connection between poetry and really what we might call good, unquotes, or the best of the...
You mean culture?
No, humorous expression of the human use of the language.
Sure.
Humor, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I would always, when I would do comedy, I also
You did comedy,
Yeah, I also was a poet fronting as a comedian.
You were a
they
poet
would pay poets.
Yeah.
But now, on the rapping on the jazz genre, poets get paid.
They're getting money
for mixing jazz with a little comedy and smacking a little poetry. Now they get paid.
Yeah.
But if you come up, and I also think that the poets in the last century were really setting the idea for the direction because they could idealize Walt Whitman.
The antenna of the race.
Walt Whitman.
Yeah.
But I really believe that the people doing that now really are the therapists, the psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, and I think their role is diminishing. And that means is suddenly an individual gets an idea of what it means to be happy and healthy, an image of what it means to be successful outside of a commodity materialistic term. These are things that are cultivated by the therapist to bring out of people. So the role of the therapist is very similar to the role of the poet in the last century.
No, the shamans.
This is very interesting because
it is.
the yogis and the shamans and the psychotherapists are creating an exchange of language based on a mutually agreed upon perception
of reality,
that now shamans are coming out of Central America or whatever, talking to yogis coming out of the East, talking to because the components of their view of humans is very similar, different words. So pretty soon I can see a language of evolving of its own that has unites yogis and shamans and therapists in a way that they are working together in a community, and that language is going to go through a process until it's part of the mainstream. And
it'll be at Lincoln Center then, right?
Well, no. I think people will be able to, speak that. It's like music has its own language. Computer world has its own language. When these other people who are working to heal and to bring about an integrity in a human form, those people who are genuine, who are not just mass producing and throwing drugs or whatever on people's face, those people who are sincere are developing a language that they can speak to each other.
Right. They can cry.
Just like
Ornette Coleman's doing some great things. Harmonics, he calls it, for music in jazz. Yeah, he's got an idea like that. It's that kind of thing, and it's coming, and it's a kind of language that's beginning to get through the linear constructs of literate world. I think we're coming into.
See
that. We're coming into post-literate.
I see.
Are we getting back to the oral traditions of storytelling?
I don't think we get. Yeah.
And that, do you think we're going to go past literacy, or in a? I do. Yeah, I think so.
Because
too,
I like working with the people now in groups like this. In fact, I'm even breaking down the being on the stage with the people thing, because that's still part of a model.
Yeah.
Where that doesn't serve me. I'd rather be involved with the people in a different setting.
Just in life?
Well, in life and in art.
Yeah.
The idea of being around a little fireplace, and everybody sharing.
Storytelling.
All storytelling.
That's what there was back in Homer's day.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
beyond, back in the old days.
And I love that when people get to be turned on that their story of their life is cool, and they have a lot of good things to say, they actually can change the story of their life by working out different endings, which I do with therapy.
We've had this commitment to literacy and linear thoughts and perceptions and so forth. You got a guy like Michener writing 8 pages to describe what is sensed. You stand on the mountaintop in Hawaii, and he takes 8 pages to describe it, and you're suspending your feeling for 8 pages while you read this thing strung out that you're going to experience in a split second if you're there multi-sensually experiencing it. So people are more and more, with the extended mediums of what are beginning to experience these extensions of this kind of thing in a way the same as walking through life. So life itself and life experience becomes more and more like an art form in a certain sense, or susceptible to
your
art.
life is your art. Your life is your art.
But we have these artifacts of institutions that just sort of get in the way.
Well, they could get in the way, and they actually present the situation, and that's one of the reasons why the model of I'm the doctor and you're the sick person, and I'm hip and you're not hip, I'm the father and you're the child, is a perpetuation of the illness. I'm at a point where I'm moving.
But some people are more hip than others.
Oh yeah, I'm moving to
Buckley was, beyond
the idea we're all moving towards a community of healers.
Yeah.
Where we're all therapists and all clients.
Therapists and clients.
Yeah. So everyone shares on who they are in the game, and I think people that have gone through therapy for so long, after a while, they know a lot about therapy.
Which of the therapies is it that they went through? There's so many. It's so complex. It's more complex than economics. I mean, there's so many different kinds of therapies. I mean, there can't be therapies.
The organization, basically what it is the underlying assumption of interpersonal relationship historically has been based upon this master-slave power submissiveness mentality.
Coming out of the scarcity assumptions that we've had that we're transcending. Perhaps.
And race, sex, age, money. I got more money than you, so I'm hipper than you. I'm white, you're black.
That
I'm
rap
hipper
that
than
you started off with the institutional structure of a major organization.
Well, see, the
secretary to the secretary.
Institutions are extensions of interpersonal relationships. So the underlying assumption of interpersonal relationships can be projected so that the organizing principle becomes superiors, inferiors, and competitors.
Well, how do they ever get all those guys to march in line? Soldiers, to go off and
they
kill
regiment
each other.
the bodies,
like
and they regiment the mind. The mind through the mass media. Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, God bless him.
God bless Noam Chomsky. The idea of a corporate 1% owning 90%, and all the corporations feeding back to demonstrate how the mind and the feelings are to response in a conformed manner. So that the point of evaluation is this lifestyle that's constantly used as a yardstick to measure whether you're succeeding or not, and it's reinforced by the media.
Yeah, and everything's commoditization now. I mean, in this
moment,
everything.
You take things like what's going on in spoken word, and a lot of the therapeutic stuff, where people are actually going to the core of that and working culturally to help people create their own modes and definition of what success is. And this is a cultural transformation that people are going at centrally. Like we were talking earlier, part of the new material I'm doing is going right after cultural hegemony. Why should Greenwich be the prime meridian?
Well, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
Why should 1997 and the birth of Christ be the cultural reference point for the planet? Why? Every time we write 1997, someplace back, Christ was born BC. Whose marketing idea was that? It was phenomenal.
Yeah, right.
It was a phenomenal marketing idea. Hey, hey, man, we're going to sell some. What are we going to do now? Oh, let's start a religion. Okay. What about this? Sure. And let's get them. Every time they write 1997, they got to think of our product.
Yeah, right. Well, it was
great.
Yeah.
The reference point.
Well, I like that idea. I don't mind.
Get rid of that.
I don't mind telling you. I like that idea about the prime meridian because they just got this book Longitude that they wrote, and I like that. And I've said to you on it that occasion because Christopher Columbus saw that light on October 10th, and we're coming up into October. This will air probably around Columbus time. He saw that light on the night of October 10th, 29 nautical miles.
Right? Wasn't it 11?
11th. You're right, 11th, and he had told him to turn back in 10 days. He saw that light in the far distant horizon, and that line of longitude, 29 nautical miles off San Salvador, if you draw that line straight north, it comes on at Brighton Bay, and it absolutely goes right through the center of the world center of the United Nations.
You're kidding.
No, I do. I looked it up in the Geodetic Survey, and it exactly goes right through the. And if you wanted to give and that's the meeting of East and West from where we began in Africa.
That's funny.
And so why shouldn't we start a new prime meridian? Why should it be in Greenwich? I don't know. I mean, we could do it. I mean, this is a rationale for it.
Let's advocate and say.
No, you would go for that, right?
Absolutely.
But not very many people would. Frank.
Go to United Nations.
I went to the librarian with all the maps, and she said, "You're going to change the prime meridian.
Just like
don't
the
do
scream.
It." Yeah, right.
You want to try? Yeah, I do that
but
all the
such
time.
ideas generally aren't.
Well, I do this bit now. It's
yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
It's called "Time is a Fraud Perpetuated by the Manufacturers' Clocks and Watches," right? And in it, I do the gangsters dividing up using time.
Yeah,
right? It's very funny, but people get really uptight because it's such a fundamental. What's today's date?
Yeah.
Oh, the 11th of September, 1997.
Well, you got to have some basis for organizing yourself.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
But why do it on religious?
Some common.
Why use that? Why use that? If we're talking about transcending a very narrow-based thing, I mean, why don't we just create? I like to see the United Nations come up with a committee to decide. Let's have time in a different way.
Well, if you support
more universal,
the United Nations, why should there be? Why should it be that the line that we're going to orient ourselves? I mean, the equator. Okay, this is like a jazz riff or something. The equator makes geophysical sense. That makes sense. But to go longitudinally, it could be anywhere.
Yeah.
And we all begin in Africa.
You know why?
We all begin in Africa.
You know why?
And they went eastward and they went westward. And this is the east-west. And this is the gathering of those two cultures. And it goes right through the United Nations.
You know why?
It comes right off Columbus Circle.
Just like Shakespeare.
We could have a new prime meridian who go right through New York City.
Just like Shakespeare is the heavyweight champion playwright.
Yeah.
Just like, and why not? There's been dozens of other really good playwrights. He's good. Yeah. It's Anglo-cultural hegemony.
Really? You think so?
It was the guns.
It's those wasps. Huh?
It was the English guns.
Yeah.
That came over and they brought the missionaries and whatever, and that's what they did. They just
so what do you think about it with your word, your spoken word? Do you think 100 years from now that all the world is going to speak English? And that this tight little island the size of Michigan is giving its language, and all these 10 billion people are going to speak English?
Broken English.
Amazing.
Broken English.
It's an amazing feat.
I think English, I love English. Hey, I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, the point I'm bringing out is English will be a broken English, and my prediction about this. However, the language will swim with a cultural difference, with the orientation will be much more into liberating and healing people than in a way that is ingested and incorporated in the individual. Each one of us personifies the culture. Each one of us is a representative of the species. If we were to pick somebody picked us up from Mars and they said, well, we only got room for one of these people, there's like 5 billion. All right, let's take Harold as
more than that.
6 billion. Let's take Harold as the representative, okay? We would have all of those. So when we're talking about the cultural evolution, so that the individual that personifies that culture moves from like a diseased, neurotic, scared process to someone who's like pretty much in touch with who they are and where they are, and is working to maximize whatever potential they have in their life while they're alive with everyone else. Well, we as poets and artists must maintain that vision on an abstract conceptual level for humanity. We must outlive our bodies. It's not good enough to try to make fame happen. We've got to become myths. And what I'm talking about is resonating to a vision that transcends and lives in an abstract material.
Well, that's true of the physics of the universe. Then we say, hey, that way.
Let's go so that everybody's happy. Everybody is cool. Let's have, and that vision will organize how humanity will move. And right now,
maybe even onto its transcendence.
That's right, onto its transcendence. Right now, I see that vision as part of what the the collective subconscious, coming out of a collective subconscious, because we've always wanted utopia. Even though there's been this run, you could just as well.
Why not? Why not think utopia?
Right, that's right.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is history has been written in terms not of utopia, although if you look at it from the view, it has. And all this other stuff of charting it because of war and inventions and who did what to what.
It's control,
actually,
isn't
control.
it? Yeah,
you move it around the view and say, let's look at what humanity has attempted to do to make life on Earth better and make our orientation away from that to, look at the orientation of humanity as a pursuit to have utopia and begin to really have a vision that we all can buy into. And then the United Nations could be a family reunion.
Well, I think the United Nations should be supported and so forth. But do you think that the poets are the artists, the poets, are the antenna of the race, as some have said?
As I said before,
do you think they're sort of resonating to a kind of thing out there?
I think that
beyond
not necessarily just poets. I think that role is very intricate to humanity. Has been from the first time we went and just banged a rock. Okay, but at different times it has taken different forms in history. At last century, Walt Whitman and the great American, that's where the poets were the visionaries. That's changed. I've seen that. Now I could see that the visionaries are going to be the harmonolingual, the people that are going to be vibrating on this unified language that is developing those will be the poets of the next century.
And a lot of this stuff,
not the musicians.
And it might be the leadership qualities of those who are going to do that is going to come out of humor a lot. That's going to unite people more than they might think, and it goes on and like that. I don't know. Plato kept the poets out of the Republic, but that's another history, and that may be also my favorite line, which is James Joyce's "History is a nightmare," from which we're attempting to awaken, and perhaps the poets and the rappers will help us do that. Well, listen, Frank, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming in, and we'll let people know you got your thing, Bopaganda, soon to be out, and interesting thing talking about cultural roots in New York City. Happy to bring you those perceptions. We on Conversations invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it. This is Dr. Francesco Patricolo, artist extraordinaire, wordsmith, and doctor of psychology. Right. And happy to bring you those perceptions. We'll see you next week. And again, Frank, thanks again for coming in. It's good to welcome you into Portland, back to your old home ground.
Thank you very much, Harold. I'm glad to be here.
Until next time. Well, it just goes. It's a seamless web. We just go on talking. We could put another piece of music under this.
You become the evolution.